Welcome to episode 3 of A Walk Through Time. Tonight, we drift into the 1860s, a time of cannon smoke, candlelight, and letters passed between battlefield and home. Let the voices of Jefferson County guide you through the quiet courage and loud heartbreak of the Civil War era. Settle into stillness and take a deep breath. Let the story unfold, soft as falling ash on a winter's morning. The thunder of war hadn't yet reached Jefferson County, but the skies were darkening. Before the crack of rifles or the roll of drums, change was already marching in. Farmers were building new homes. Railroads were creeping north. And families, they were growing and breaking. Logging was in full swing. The Black River roared with sawmills. Settlements like Watertown, Adams, and Brownville were growing into villages with brick storefronts and schoolhouses. The Erie Canal had opened up new trade routes, and the St. Lawrence Seaway was drawing the farmers in and spectators alike. In Sackett's Harbor, the old Navy Yard had quieted, but whispers of conflict remained. The veterans of 1812 were starting to age. Men like Jacob Brown and Zebulon Pike had become local legends, but their sons, they were taking over the plows, the pulpits, and the printing presses. New churches rose, especially Methodist and Baptist. Revivals swept the countryside, filling tents with song and sweat and tears. One farmer wrote in 1845 that his entire family, quote, gave their hearts to the Lord in a single Sunday afternoon, end quote. Meanwhile, abolitionist sentiments began to take hold. Speakers came north from Syracuse and Rochester to the Jefferson County barns and parlors, urging resistance to slavery and calling for reform. Though Jefferson County was far from the Mason-Dixon line, it did play a quiet role in the Underground Railroad. Oral histories from families in Luray, Champion, and Ellisburg described attics with false walls and hidden compartments beneath floorboards. One story from the 1850s tells of a black family arriving in Antwerp in the middle of a snowstorm. They were fed, clothed, and taken by sleigh under the cover of night to Cape Vincent, where a friendly ship's captain ferried them across the water to freedom in Canada. Harriet Tubman herself is said to have passed through nearby areas. And while direct records are scarce, newspaper editorials from Watertown as early as 1856 described the passage of fugitive men along our roads and the bravery of those who offered them bread. But not everyone agreed. Some Jefferson County families, especially those with business ties to the South, they opposed this. Textile manufacturers relying on Southern cotton, they feared financial ruin if slavery ended. Tensions even ran within families. One young woman in Henderson wrote to her cousin in 1858, quote, "Your talk of the Negro's cause and the righteousness of their freedom strikes me as foolish. My father says we shall lose trade if this madness continues. You are brave, dear Clara, but I fear you are naive." End quote. It was becoming a common story. Cousins growing apart, neighbors disagreeing, newspapers fighting in print, ministers delivering opposing sermons from pulpits just towns apart. Don't take my word for it. Let the past speak for themselves. A letter from Charles P. Welling, Brownville, 1859. Quote, "I fear we shall come to blows before long. Even the farmers at the tavern argue like lawyers. I tend my fields and try to keep quiet, but there's something in the air. The dogs bark more, and the children are restless." End quote. Sarah Murphy, Rutland, 1860. Quote, "News from the South again. Lincoln is elected. Father says it is the end of the Union. I do not know what that means. The neighbors cry at church. Mother tells us to pray harder." End quote. These were the final calm days. The war drums had not yet sounded, but the anxiety hung like fog across the North Country. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president in November 1860, Jefferson County saw eruptions of both celebration and anger. Church bells rang in Watertown. Some factory owners closed for the day in protest. After Fort Sumter fell in April 1861, Jefferson County answered the call. Young men from Adams, Antwerp, and Theresa signed up in droves. Recruiters stood on courthouse steps, offering bonuses of $25 to anyone who would fight for the Union. A letter. David Loomis, age 17, from Sackett's Harbor, wrote, quote, "I signed today. Ma wept. Pa shook my hand. I don't think I know what war truly means, but the preacher says it is right and that our flag will lead us to safety." End quote. The country had changed overnight. Women took over the farms. Boys too young to enlist delivered food to neighbors. Church groups met weekly to sew uniforms and roll bandages. In Brownville, school teachers began starting the day with Union hymns and prayers for their soldiers. Newspapers published long lists of local names, those gone to war, and then soon after, those never returning. An excerpt from the Watertown Reformer, July 1862. Quote, "We regret to report the death of Private Nathaniel H. Wright, 24, of Adams, killed in action at Gaines Mill. His remains are expected by train this Thursday." End quote. A letter from Mary Hastings to her sister in 1862. Quote, "When the telegram came, I dropped the pan. I had always thought him lucky. He wrote such cheerful words, even in Virginia. I cannot see how the sun still rises." End quote. By the end of 1863, Jefferson County had given more than 4,000 of its sons to the Union Army. The 10th New York Cavalry, the 35th Infantry, and the 94th, all with heavy local enlistment, saw fierce battles in the East. Some never came home. Others returned, missing limbs, or with lungs scorched by cannon smoke, and grief. The grief etched into their faces. A letter from Silas Cleveland, near Petersburg, 1864. Quote, "I have seen too much, and yet tomorrow we charge again. I think of home, of our old barn, of the maple trees. I wonder if they still stand." End quote. As the war dragged on, Jefferson County began to feel the strain. Inflation made flour scarce. Horses were seized for military use. Desertions occurred, especially among those who had enlisted for bonuses and grown delusioned. Draft riots broke out in nearby counties, though Jefferson stayed relatively calm. One local man was nearly tarred and feathered for voicing sympathy for the South. His barn was burned down days later. Political lines had hardened into bloodlines. In 1865, the country erupted with joy at the news of Lee's surrender, then plunged into mourning just days later when Lincoln was assassinated. A black ribbon was tied around the Watertown courthouse bell for a full month. As we leave this era behind, Jefferson County was forever changed. New cemeteries held new soldiers. Farmhouses bore empty chairs. And a generation that came of age in the 1850s would never look at their country the same. Next time, we'll talk about the stories of those that survived, what they had to do to rebuild their communities, or couldn't. We'll meet veterans who returned to find their homes gone, widows who had become teachers, and sons who became leaders. So for now, take a deep breath and let the history speak for itself. And I'll see you next episode. Good night.